You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Justice is Served, where we bring you in-depth and personal analysis of legal stories in the news. Today we've got a full house here joining me. I'm your host, Chelsea Galicia, a freelance workers' compensation attorney here in LA, went to undergrad at UC Irvine, Go Eaters, and law school at Southwestern. I am joined by a fellow Southwestern grad, BJ Abron, who's straight out of Compton and straight out of law school.
Yes.
He has experience in business development, business and legal affairs at BET and the Public Defender's Office.
Yes.
And we have our special guest host, Nisha Vida. Thank you so much for being here. She comes to us all the way from South Africa, or at least that's where she was born before she moved here to LA at the age of 8, right? And I thought it was so funny that your family was trying to escape apartheid only to arrive here to a recently destroyed city of Los Angeles after the Rodney King riots. But you have graduated from USC undergrad, where you were an international relations major, and then she's now a third-year law student at UCLA, and she's getting her dual degree, a master's in public policy. I think we will see, we will be voting for her for public office someday soon. And of course, Shaka Smith, who was born in Miami, went to undergrad at Princeton, law school in DC before moving out to LA to pursue acting and fitness modeling. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
All right.
Can everybody hear? Because I am not hearing very well. Everybody's going to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe it's just me. I'll speak louder to hear myself. Hopefully that won't be necessary. Okay, so let's jump into the first story here. A second-degree murder charge and attempted second-degree murder charge for 2 officers who shot into a car and killed a 6-year-old child. This happened in Louisiana. Apparently, marshals, these were 2 marshals, and they claimed that they were trying to serve a warrant or arrest following a warrant that actually we found does not exist.
Right.
And this 6-year-old child ended up with 5 bullets in his chest and his head. There's a body cam that has allowed at least the police department to see that video. It has not been released to the public. Nisha, my first question about this is, these officers have been charged with second-degree murder, second-degree attempted murder, because they shot at the father too. The father, though, survived after being...
He's in critical condition, I believe.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so this question first is, why second-degree murder?
Sure. So second degree, the difference between second degree and first degree is that first degree suggests some kind of premeditation, that the person sat and thought about, do I want to take this action? What's interesting is that the standard kind of differs depending on what state you're in. So I believe in California, actually, it's a really low standard. So if you take even a second to think about it, you could be charged with first degree. So presumably they charged second degree because I'm not sure if they were trying to give the police officers a little bit, they were bringing charges against them to get to accountability, but I wonder if they could have charged first degree because, they chased this car. They were in a police chase. They shot multiple times. I imagine that somewhere along this route, they made up the warrant. I imagine at somewhere along the path they thought, do I want to do this? But, I mean, I still think that it's good that there's some accountability for this action
Right.
that's happening.
Yeah.
I think my sense is they probably didn't know the 6-year-old was in the car, so that's why it's probably not first degree if they didn't know he was in the car at all.
Oh,
Okay.
that's
Well,
true.
the thing about that is, even with first degree murder, and correct me if I'm wrong, the doctrine of transfer intent still plays a role. And so even though they may not have known that, they followed the guy.
Yeah.
What's more premeditated than following someone, ambushing them when they're stopped, and then you kill them? That's first degree murder for me. Now, I completely agree that maybe in this particular circumstance, well, first of all, we're not accustomed to seeing police officers charged with second degree murder. So maybe to even take it automatically to first degree might be, I completely agree with you for that perspective. Maybe this was just, let's get something here.
So do they have any good defenses, though?
I mean, personally, again, as you can hear with my sentiments, I would like to see a first-degree murder charge here. As a future defense attorney, I would probably. I mean, of course, we don't know a lot of the facts here, right? So a lot of the facts are real gloomy. They haven't released the video footage. We've heard that there was a arrest warrant that they were issuing, and then they retracted from that. We heard that the guy was attempting to run his vehicle into police officers. We kind of heard a retraction from that. So the facts are not complete enough to essentially give a defense. If some of those facts were true, of course, self-defense will be a complete defense in the matter, or if not, at the very least, a mitigating circumstance to another charge.
Yeah, 18 shots. So it was 18 shots, I
It was 18
believe, and that
shots.
doesn't sound like self-defense, though who knows? But
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it sounds a little bit
Right.
more excessive than.
Right.
So,
Now,
Shaka, what do you... oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say,
didn't cut you off.
I believe, if I'm not wrong, I believe he had a prior record too,
Yeah.
some kind of prior record. So
Yes.
with the knowledge of that, these things could all come together to create some type of defense, depending on the circumstances.
In fact, I understand that both officers involved had prior incidents. Both had pending civil issues for excessive force.
Right.
Separately.
Right.
So,
This is true.
Shaka, any idea what will happen? You think we'll get a conviction?
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see a conviction, and primarily for the reason that the colonel has seen the body cam footage.
Right.
He said it was, horrific. So if their own colonel, and police tend to really close ranks, but if he saw the footage and deemed it horrific, then I think it's probably.
Yeah, in the press, he was speaking to the press, and he was asked, what was the role of the body cam in, pursuing these charges, and the officer acknowledged, the chief of police said, I've seen it, and he said a couple of times comments that made it sound like he was very emotionally disturbed by what he had seen, like the worst thing that he had ever seen. So I don't think that the body cam played a small role at all. I think the body cameras are really important, and I think that this might be one of the cases that show us why they were so necessary.
Yes.
So
And, I mean, just to touch bases on that, I completely think, and obviously, as you just stated, in this particular circumstance, it seems like the body cam did play a huge role, and it definitely needs to be there. For me, I question as to whether the body cam should be visible to everyone and not just the police officers, because these body cams were implemented at a point in time when no one necessarily trusts what the police are doing, because they're killing people and they're hiding information. So, of course, in this situation, I'm thankful that we do have some honesty and that we do have some truthfulness from the lieutenant who made the statement saying that the video was just horrific.
yeah, I mean, otherwise, if there was no video, we would have this father and against the word of the two officers.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, but my thing is, even with the video, in a situation where if the officers saw the video and they wanted to hide it or they wanted to disguise it, we need to see that video as the public.
Yeah, or I think we just need to know that we have protocols in place, that there are people that it's disseminated widely, at least amongst administrators, so that it can't just be erased or it's lost or missing,
Yeah.
which we've seen in some cases before.
Yeah, and this is one of the bigger issues with the body cams is their release or non-releasing to the public. And I tend to agree with BJ that they should be released, although I can understand in certain circumstances, maybe
might be.
not. This is a slippery one.
Something that's also come up with body cams is whether or not the video footage can be used as evidence within a trial. Because I think that there's been some states where they're trying to block that. So the video, you can, there's the body cams, you have the footage, but that footage then can't be used as evidence in a trial.
I can't see why that would be. It's not biased. It's not prejudicial. I mean,
Well, it definitely can be
It can be
prejudicial
prejudicial.
There may be some.
because it's only one viewpoint, and that viewpoint holds so much
But
weight. That's what I
anytime
would
you
argue.
have like an eyewitness, you're only getting that eyewitness's viewpoint.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the issue probably comes into play with editing, and so what protocols do they have in place to ensure that this is the film that was shot and it's the full and complete?
So that's the same basis of entering any evidence.
Yeah.
The same way that anything is entered. You've got to
Authentication,
check
yeah.
authentication, and an expert says that this is not touched, this was the original, whatever. So I definitely think that we should be careful of not allowing videos that have been manipulated anyway into evidence, but whether
But
they
I
should
agree.
get in.
It's just like any other form of tangible evidence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it would be good to know what standard protocol is across all police departments across the country. you
Yeah,
know?
I think it'll be probably a number of years before we get a federal policy or just
Yeah.
enough states doing the same thing where that we get a norm. Because right now it's like every police department for itself.
Exactly.
But I guess we call that progress.
Yeah, I
Slow but
guess so.
painful. All right, turning our attention now to the students protesting racism on college campuses around the United States. We have Yale and University of Missouri are some of the larger ones getting attention, but we've also have things going on at UCLA, University of Michigan. I also saw Arizona State, University of Oklahoma. So what is going on now that we're seeing all of this movement?
Well, I mean, what's going on are things that have always been going on. You have statements that are being made. Racial slurs. In fact, a number of both of these incidents have developed because of a racial slur or because of some type of discrimination have taken place. Now, the reason we're here is because these students are fed up. Society is fed up, and we want to see something done, and we want to see the administrators create some type of action and take some type of action.
Did any of you experience anything like these students are protesting when you were either at undergrad or law school?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for anyone else, but just throughout my life, I've experienced various different racial slurs, various different forms of discrimination in the workplace, at school, in particular, even at law school. And somewhere in law school, you would think that you have intellectuals or people who think different or outside the norm, right? At the very least, are politically correct, right?
Yeah.
No, it's the opposite. And so you still get these statements in class. You still get these statements outside of class where there'll be some sly comments and basically there's racial undertones in those statements. And some people notice them, others just go about their day, but they stick with you.
Yeah, but I would say for me, I didn't see it from the administration, whereas I'm seeing some almost defense of these statements and these characterizations by the administration. So I think that's what was a little bit jarring to me, especially in the Yale incident, where you have the administration initially sending out something that says, let's be mindful of kind of cultural stereotypes, and I thought was a great email that they sent out regarding Halloween costumes. And then you had the residential advisor saying something different, saying kids should be allowed to have a period in their life where they're offensive. And I get the tension, Are we being too sensitive? Especially these kids are a lot younger, they haven't lived through civil rights. They probably have only heard a few stories about this, Will blackface be the same 50 years from now as it is today? But what I do take issue with is the administration making a conscious effort to be inclusive and the residential advisor causing tension by almost trying to roll that back.
Right, and
Yeah.
then it turned this into a free speech issue, and people love that as their go-to defense. And Yale was not trying to say, don't enjoy your free speech, but they were trying to guide people to being mindful and being conscious of the effect of their actions have, and words and ways of expression have on other people. I think that we're so almost childlike with our clinging to First Amendment, free speech. Yes, I know you have the free speech right. I enjoy it. I appreciate it. I value it. But is it wrong for somebody to then try and guide us to use that to the benefit of people? I mean, people are at institutions of higher learning so that they can better themselves and make a positive difference in the world. How many college essays, law school essays were written about, I want to make the world a better place? And yet, you can't speak kindly or can't be conscious of what you're doing and making sure that you're not hurting people. The very least thing that you can do is try not to insult people or offend people. I don't think it's a free speech issue. I think we're being silly almost about it and juvenile about it.
You know, I mean, I think we are being juvenile. Well, some of us at least. But I do think it's a free speech issue. The reason why I state that is because the First Amendment allows for that protection. People aren't grappling to something that they're making up. It's actually there, and they can utilize that. I don't agree with that. I completely agree with you.
The students protesting have the free speech right just as much as anybody wearing a silly costume does.
Yes.
And the university did not say we're going to expel, suspend, or throw anybody
It was
out.
a mindful instruction.
Yeah, so
Right.
it's not like they were trying to crush their rights. They were just being like a mother who says if you don't have something kind to say, don't say it all. What are you going to say to your mom? Screw you, Mom. I have
Free
a First
speech,
Amendment
yeah.
right, you know?
Well,
I think
in our actuality, yes, you can, and it sounds absurd.
You
but
can, but is that really...
Here's the thing, right? I have the free speech right to sit here and not say regular sentences, but just say profanity, to pick racial slurs for everybody at this table and use them instead of your first name. I have the free speech right to go to my job and tell my employer that I think he's a jerk, you know, and say whatever else. And if I got fired, would people say, oh, would my defense be, oh, I was exercising my free speech rights? And I think with this Halloween costume, so I was an undergrad a long time ago. When I was there, a frat threw an illegal alien party, right? So they blocked off their frat by building this fake wall. They put a fence around their frat, and you got into the party by crawling under the fence.
wow.
You know, so I think what gets lost in these conversations is the context for why these types of costumes are offensive. Jim Crow, right? Jim Crow legislation, America's segregationist legislation, was written after a minstrel show, right? It was written after a show where white people put on blackface and pranced around making fun of black people to bring them down and contribute to the oppression of the community. So when people show up at a Kanye Western with their faces painted black and fake padded butts and things like that, yes, you have the free speech right to do that, but at least you should understand that it is offensive and why it's offensive. And then if you choose to go ahead and do that, that's fine. But at least your intent will be clear. And if people are upset with you, well, they have the free speech right to be upset with you too.
And I think we have to note that this is not an academic setting. This is, most kids at Yale live on campus. So this was about their home. And so it was about how to make this inclusive for everyone so that everyone can enjoy their home and feel comfortable being here at this campus. And so I think it wasn't going, you have the free speech in academic settings, say what you will and say in an academic tone. This was about, let's just make everyone have a good home life.
Yeah, but see, my thing is, I like to address the issue. I like to solve the problem. And when you talk about solving the problem, the fact that they still can cling to the free speech is there. It's there. And I'm not protecting them. Don't get me wrong. These are absurd comments. These are absurd ways of dressing and expressing yourselves on Halloween. What I'm saying is maybe we shouldn't be so afraid of altering the First Amendment. We get so scared of talking about the Constitution. We get so scared of altering the Constitution. But I'm a firm believer that the Constitution is a living and breathing body of work, and it should be altered according to time.
Right.
And so my thing is maybe we should make alterations to the First Amendment so that you can't cling onto the First Amendment as a defense.
That's true. There are limits to it. You can't
Yell fire in a crowded theater.
exactly. So
I feel too that culture just needs to change because it's right now our culture that we live in allows for people to dress as a sexy Native American princess without thinking about the fact that you're putting on some stupid outfit that's, you know, desecrating a sacred costume, you know, where beaded patterns, you know, communities spend hours putting these beads together and each of the different symbols have these religious meanings. So people don't, we have a culture that permits this type of desecration of other cultures and this mockery of other cultures and then permits people to hide behind the First Amendment.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, I feel like changing the law to a certain degree is useful, but at the same time, we need to think about the cultural setting that we live in.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I think the way the administration put it in be mindful of cultural stigmas and stereotypes, I think it leads to productive conversations like this one. And I think going back against that for the residential advisor does not.
Right.
And so I think we're just promoting understanding. They're promoting like comprehension of who people are and where they come from.
What about the other side of this, who are saying that we are all just being too sensitive? We live in a time where this generation, because they've been handed out trophies just for participating, are so fragile and so inequipped to handle the realities of life. And we need to stop being so politically correct. Can't people just lighten up? What about response for those people?
Great response, but as you said, the administration wasn't saying you'll be expelled or suspended. They were just saying be mindful. So if that's what you want to do, go for it. You have that protection, and it might be funny in your group or what have you. But I think there was no repercussion. They were just simply saying be mindful, because a lot of times people do these things and they go back and they do regret it. And so if you get that instruction and think about it prior to doing it, maybe you'll make a different choice.
Well, I mean, in my experience from seeing the people that make those comments, those are comments that come from people who are actually privileged in society, or who would fall into the grasp, or not the grasp, who would fall into the group of people who would be considered the oppressor. And so these aren't people who have been hindered or hurt or burdened or discriminated against, who are saying that, you're pouting, shut up, you're being a baby, be a big boy.
Yes, that's so true. On a lot of the articles that I read where people were claiming that, I would look and it would be either a man, a white person, or my favorite, a white man speaking about being too politically correct and too sensitive. I mean, to me, that's like a guy talking about a period. You have never had one, never will, don't know what the heck you're talking about, have no experience.
Those cramps, no big deal.
You have free speech and you can talk about it, but your opinion should have no weight and should get no respect because you have no idea what you're talking about.
I just want to add to the great irony in comments like that of themselves having the effect of silencing protest and silencing outcry and silencing people's stories and silencing people coming out and telling very difficult stories to tell. Because when you are discriminated against, or when you hear a comment that has racial undertones, sometimes you think you're crazy. Like, am I just imagining that this happened? Or it's 2015. Is it possible that this is happening? And it's very difficult to stand up and say something about it, because it's always difficult to stand up and say something about it. So I think when people say things like that, especially when it's not their own lived experience, they are in essence silencing people who are attempting to speak up for themselves. So I just find it greatly hypocritical when people use the First Amendment to protect some kinds of speech and then forget about it conveniently when other people make speech that they don't agree with.
I mean, I guess, sensitive people have free speech too.
Yeah, sure.
And so it comes full circle. Okay, moving on to the hero police officer, quote unquote, killed in the line of duty, and I'm using air quotes here because we have now come to find out that Officer Joe Glinwich actually staged his own suicide. The first question, of course, is why would a man do this? Apparently, there were quite a few reasons.
Yeah.
Shaka, do you
what a
want to tell us what they
completely
are?
bizarre story. So it turns out this guy was embezzling money from a fund he was in charge of managing, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
For like a kids
For children.
program.
Yeah, exactly, embezzling money. And then he had also had some investigations regarding sexual misconduct, and he even had another employee saying for years she'd been was coerced into doing sexual acts for him. Why this was the exact moment he chose to take his life, I guess the investigation might have been coming to a head.
Right. So apparently this money that he was stealing, laundering, he was using it for some pretty fun things, not just for paying his mortgage, but also for looking at adult websites, gym memberships, travel expenses, withdrawing cash, and making loans. And there was somebody who was about to uncover his actions, and he was looking to put out a hit on this person. And this was about to come to light weeks away from his retirement. So perhaps he just I'm not going to, he had developed a great reputation in this town, and he was like, I'm not going to go out this way.
I'm wondering if probably he wanted to preserve some sort of life insurance money for his family as well, not looking like a suicide.
Right.
But yeah, at the end it seems like when it was not deemed a suicide, that some people came out and said that this was a Black Lives Matter issue. And
Before, when we all thought that it was an actual murder. So how it happened is that he apparently on his way to work, saw some suspicious activity with 3 gentlemen, one who he radioed in was black.
And they took his gun and his
one
pepper
of them,
spray,
had taken his gun and pepper spray, and he decided heroically to chase them rather than wait for backup. And the next thing we know, he's dead. And so the evidence was strewn such that it looked like somebody else killed him. And so for, I think it's been a month now, that we have all thought that this was this brave, courageous officer who, was involved in the lives of the youth and had a great reputation and was weeks away from enjoying his retirement, was just murdered in cold blood. And people that I'm going to call the Black Lives Matter hater group used this as an example of the negative effects of the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that it was causing people to hate police officers and then kill them. I wonder now what those people are they going to retract their statements, issue any acknowledgement like, hey, I was suckered into this story, I thought this guy had been murdered and I wrongly blamed the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, asking for an apology is probably too far-fetched.
When I read up on this issue, the word that I saw first was betrayal. That's what these people are feeling. These people who are supporting him, his accolades over the years, they felt betrayal once they found out the true story. Now, for those who phrase this as or want to blame the incident as it was portrayed, as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, it's ridiculous. It's preposterous. It's the Black Lives Matter movement stands for a group of people standing up for themselves. It stands for a group of people saying that obviously we know the police are watching us, but we're watching you. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? And so it doesn't mean, hey, we're going to kill police officers. It's crazy. The police officers, even if that was a result, they brought that upon themselves by killing in every community in our society today. And that incident that we just talked through in a previous case, where we just saw the 2 officers shoot up and critically wound a father and kill his son, is ridiculous, and it's a testament to the real reason why, if there is an uproar against police officers, that's the reason why.
Yeah.
I want to add, so I do think that there's validity to the statement that police officers are first responders, and that they face dangers that a civilian wouldn't necessarily. And I've been talking to officers because I know some folks who work in that capacity, and I don't know if there's been more sort of threats against police officers that have arisen not because of the Black Lives Matter movement, but because of all the conversation that's been happening nationally around police brutality and just people being even more pissed off than they were before. Because I think people have been angry at the police for years, especially in communities that have experienced excessive police violence. So I wanted to put that out there, but I think it's ridiculous to blame a movement. Individuals make the choices that they make, and the Black Lives Matter movement exists because it's a community coming together across the nation and even the world, because colonial legacy is a global legacy, and just standing up for injustices that have been happening over and over and over and over and over and over again, and bringing light to those, and taking political action about that. So I don't think that you can blame an individual's action on an entire movement in that way.
We don't even know if these people knew about the Black.
Well, it's moot because it was a suicide.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, and they weren't even. Yeah, there was no one. But I think you have racist and intolerant people in the same way they kind of cultivated Islamophobia after 9/11, and they tried to tie people that were part of the who were Muslim to extremists. They're doing the same thing now with Black Lives Matter, and it's an easy thing to do, and it's a convenient thing to do. But I think we have to be vigilant and call it out, just as we're doing now.
Awesome. So in this particular case, there were hours and hours spent on this fake manhunt. I call it fake. At the time, it was very real, but now we know that there was no man to be hunted or 3 men to be hunted. Hundreds of officers were involved in this manhunt, which must have used up quite a bit of resources, taxpayer money. So is there any justice that the city can see taxpayers can get for what this officer did?
So one of the faculty members at my law school published this really long article where she did a lot of research about who pays out when a police officer is found to have committed excessive force and the family brings a civil rights case, or the individual brings a civil rights case, who is it that pays out, right? Because under the law, it's supposed to be the police officer that pays out money to the victim's family. But pretty much entirely, it's the city, right? Cities pay out every time a police officer engages in excessive force and is found to have committed excessive force and there's a civil rights case. It's over and over again, it's the city that's paying out those multi-million-dollar verdicts. So New York has paid out hundreds of millions of dollars. LA has paid out hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in taxpayer dollars for these officers who are committing excessive force crimes. So I seriously doubt that the taxpayers are going to get their money back from this manhunt, because it's just not what happens. But perhaps justice could look like restructuring the police department to ensure better accountability for officers when they act bad. I mean, this guy had done all this, he'd harassed people, he'd done all kinds of crazy
lied
things.
about things like being sick.
And these were complaints
he
that
was
were
caught.
swept under the rug.
Right.
For
And
years.
So,
Yeah. So it's going to be
And he
tough.
should give the money back, right? Like, he
all the money that was
embezzled,
embezzled, yeah, and they're saying that it's possible his wife and child knew that he was embezzling this money and using it. So,
And once you know of that's what's going on and agree to keep using the money,
You're
You're accomplice, yeah.
Exactly. All right. So speaking of judgments, let's cover a story that I call "What Happens When You Don't Pay Your Judgments." The Lil Wayne story. He's had a rough couple of weeks. Last week, he was his home in Miami was raided. Why did that happen?
oh well, Lil Wayne had a judgment against him for how much?
I think it was $1 million.
It started off as $1 million,
Yeah.
and then
Ballooned
he
to
didn't pay it.
Near 2, right?
Yes.
Right, it ballooned from late fees and all that kind of to 1.8, and then the judge said, "Oh yeah, and you got to pay an additional $200,000 for attorney's fees." So now he's $2 million in the hole for not paying a private jet company.
Yeah, so fortunately, they were able to go to his Miami home, and of the $28 million in art he had, they were able to seize $2 million. So I don't know if that's Lil Wayne's maybe $28 million art judgment collection that he just reserved for judgments he hasn't paid.
I mean, this is ridiculous. Why? I first wonder, and we're not going to be able to answer, why didn't he just pay the judgment? And then also, there's different ways of collecting on a judgment. You can garnish somebody's wages, although I don't know if he really receives like a regular paycheck the way most of us do. Sometimes you can raid bank accounts, which seems like the safer thing to do, because raiding a house, because people get scared, they can, shoot, thinking that they're being like a home invasion robbery or something. That sounds pretty dangerous, and I wonder why a bank account wasn't raided first. Maybe somebody tried that and was not able to. But they went in and they took a bunch of artwork. And Shaka, because you're from the area, you were telling us an interesting law that Florida has that O.J. Simpson is or was taking advantage of for a while.
Yeah, the homestead exemption. So you can apply if it's your primary residence in Florida. They can't touch your house, your dwelling place. And in fact, if you sell that dwelling place and you use the money for another primary dwelling place, they can't touch that money as well. So at least they can't take the house, where it sounds like he's got plenty of art in there to satisfy.
And so I did not know this, but you said that was this homestead.
Yeah, one of the reasons O.J. Simpson moved to, after the judgment from, Nicole Brown Simpson, he moved to Florida to make sure his house and his would be protected.
Gotcha. Yeah. So they get to go in, and now the judgment's for $2 million. What says that they can't just strip the walls and take everything? Because, I mean, they might not know what's a Picasso and what's a preschooler's painting on the wall. Do they just get to take everything in sight?
I'm not sure. I mean, just thinking about how search warrants work, I would presume that when a judge grants them the ability to go in, they have to have a list of certain items that are valued or...
And there must have been an agreed upon appraiser.
Right.
But, he may have actually told them that is where they could take this money from.
No.
Because why did they decide on the $28 million?
I think what happened was someone recently, someone that sells homes, a real estate broker or something, recently went into the home and they saw these valuable items in the home.
Right. A judge had to authorize this because this judgment has been out for like a year now. And it was only a couple of months ago that the judge finally agreed to allow a raiding to occur only after receiving an affidavit from a high-end real estate person who had recently been in the house to be able to say that there were, in fact, assets in the house that could be seized, because without that, can't go into the home. So apparently the dwelling is very well protected by Florida law.
Right.
And so last week, that's what happened. And then this week, just a couple days ago, he had another hit. What was that about?
So he had another hit. It was for a suit against Pyrotech Special Effects, where for a 2013 concert that he had, he ordered a bunch of fireworks, all types of fireworks for the light show and everything like that. He never paid. They eventually sued him. And at that time, they actually came to an agreement for a payment that he was going to make. He never made that payment, and so now they had to bring back another suit against him to recover for that. And so, you know, he lost that judgment as well.
Man, he better get on top of his game. Otherwise, he's just going to bleed money.
Well, he's got about $25 million in art left, so I think he's good for,
I guess
for
he's
some
savoring
time.
it. He just wants to sit on it as long as he can, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, I guess if he earned it, it's his to waste if he wishes to. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Justice is Served. I want to thank my co-hosts, BJ, Nisha, and Shaka, for joining me. Please let us know what you think of any of the stories that we covered today. You can tweet me at Chelsea Galicia.
Just BJ Abron.
At Nisha Vida.
And at Shaka Strong.
And join us next week for another episode of Justice is Served.
The views expressed here are those of the hosts only and do not
From
necessarily
producers
reflect the
Maria
views of
Menounos,
BHL.
Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire BHL crew, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us at info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I'm your BHL announcer, Scipio. Instagram me at Planet Scipio. Thank you for tuning in.
Hollywood redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.